After our warmest winter on record, I'm about ready to tackle the rest of this tree that I started in a black day for the black cherry. When I made that video, I knew I was going to be making a lot of mistakes, and I sure did. And fortunately, in addition to the ones I pointed out, some of the folks who were kind enough to view the video made comments on some of the worst mistakes that I made that I hadn't covered in that. One of the fairly common problems you can have with a saw is that the teeth can catch something or get pinched, and that could result in the blade kicking back at you. It's very important to keep hold of the saw so that if that does happen, the saw moves your hand backwards. If you're holding someplace like this and it kicks, then it could come in contact with your hand, and that's really a bad thing. You should actually have your thumb wrapped around the handle. It doesn't matter whether you're on the side or on the top, but that thumb should be wrapped around it rather than pressed behind it, because that could come loose, whereas that not only restrains the saw, but if it does move, it's going to move your hand back and get it safely out of the way. One other big problem I had was that I was regularly using the saw, moving it across, and then turning it off. And if you've got that chain moving when you do an operation like that, you've increased the amount of time at which you're at risk for getting cut. So immediately after you finish the cut you want, you should push this forward, and that chain guard will prevent the chain from moving and cutting you. So you've got an opportunity to immediately prevent the likelihood of injury. So one of the things I'm going to really make an effort at is every time I finish a cut, kick it off and then start again. But that is such an easy action to do, but I certainly need to make it a habit, and I've seen a few others, even professionals, who seem to miss that key step. So the reason this fires in that way is that in normal operation, if it kicks back, then it's hitting your hand and stopping the chain immediately, and that's very important. So that's one of the things I'm going to make a real effort to make a regular habit for me. Viewer All Things Real also pointed out a problem with my basic plan. I had planned on using my climbing rope once I got up the tree to lower the very top of the tree. And what he pointed out correctly is that you should never mix the two ropes. You should have one rope, or ropes for climbing and ropes for doing your rigging work, and you should not mix the two. The reason is that with the ropes you're using for lowering, you're potentially going to be subjecting those to some very powerful impact loads. And when you shock the rope like that, you can no longer be positive what its capacity is. If you use that same rope for climbing, and then you fall and you need your rope to support you, it may already have been shocked and damaged, and it may not be able to support you. So you should always keep ropes separately for climbing and for rigging. And once you've used a climbing rope for something and really given it a shock, you should only use it as a rigging rope after that. While you don't like to think about it, one of the possibilities you have to be prepared for is the necessity to perform a self-rescue. This is particularly important for me, as I'm going to be doing, unfortunately, most of my climbing solo. By self-rescue, I mean you've got to be able to come down out of the tree on your own in the event you need rescue. For instance, there's one video I've seen where the guy severely cut his wrist. He was bleeding badly, and he had pretty much lost the use of that wrist. So you have to be able to rescue yourself with one good hand, and you need to be able to get down out of the tree rappelling because you got to get down quickly due to the blood loss. Hopefully you've got something with you to staunch the flow, maybe some adhesive tape to wrap around the wound. But with that one hand, you have to be able to engage your device that's going to lower you, and you have to release your lanyard and be ready to rappel. So in that moment you release the lanyard, your lowering device has to be able to hold you. And then having released the lanyard, you have to be able to then release your rappel device so that you can actually rappel down the tree. This is probably reasonable to do with a few of the mechanical devices, and I wondered if there's any way to do that with just a regular rescue aid. So I started looking at it and thinking about, well, is there any way to use the hole in the shank of the rescue aid to do that? Now obviously one-handed trying to use a descending aid is going to be very difficult. I can't really bring it through and try to do all this stuff, unclipping it, get it hooked around. That's just not very fast. So I wondered about the possibility of having my descending aid already on my belt, and in this fashion going through so that as I went up it would just naturally feed through and be partially engaged around the or through the eye. And I said, okay, if I am now needing to do a self-rescue, I can grab through, take it, put it over that ear, swing it around over that ear, and now I've got something that maybe is going to work to allow me to descend. And so I gave that a try, and much to my surprise, it did one of the things right, and that is that it gave me a lock. I mean, that is actually pretty much self-locking, and unfortunately if it completely locks, yeah, that gives you a chance to do your other work, but now you can't descend on it. So that idea was a bust, because it does a good job of locking itself. So I considered one other possibility. It's with me there. I could take it, reach down, bring it up, and just simply come around it a couple of times and try that. Now if I need to go and do the release of my lanyard, it turns out that also does a self-lock, and it's a pretty good strong lock. I'm not going anyplace on it. So I said, well, that looks very promising, because now I can, again, one-handed, once I've gotten my lanyard off, come down here and do the descent on that, and that actually works. So I'm going to give that a try as a self-rescue option. It's looking sketchy, but it works. It's something I can do one-handed, so unless somebody can tell me what that hole is actually supposed to be for, and I'm certainly eager to hear that, that's one of the things I'm going to try to use it for in my climbing, is as an emergency backup for rappelling down out of the tree for self-rescue. I thought about the possibility of a traumatic injury, such as the chainsaw hitting my wrist or my hand, and a lot of bleeding ensuing. And I decided what I would consider the most important part of first aid kit would be something to stop the flow of blood. I don't want to bleed to death in the process of getting down from the tree and trying to get to my truck or to a first aid kit that I've got in my car. So it occurred to me that probably the most useful thing would be like a $4 roll of adhesive tape, waterproof tape, that I could use to just wrap tightly around it. Serve both as a tourniquet and something to seal the wound. But working one-handed, this is pretty difficult to get open. So I considered what it would take to really be able to use this quickly. And trying to start it and everything is going to be quite difficult. So I said, forget that. I'll have just this in my pocket. Now, again, trying to get the tape started is going to be a very difficult thing without the use of my hand. So what I said is, okay, I'll take this, I'll go ahead and I will get it started. I'll take probably about 2 inches and simply fold it over on itself. And that way I've got an end that I can grab in my mouth and then wrap around with one hand. So this will be my disaster situation emergency kit. I'll keep that in my pocket and I can grab it either hand and wrap it around. So rather than having the gauze pad and having something that's difficult to get out of my back or out of this side, I'll keep it right in my breast pocket and have it ready to use. One minor point about the blood loss. Blood is like a hydrostatic fluid inside of you, and that means that you have more pressure acting at your feet than at your head. And if you're worried about a wound that's bleeding, holding it up as high as you can means that your heart has to pump against that gravity. So by holding that wound up high, you're reducing the pressure of the blood that's trying to escape from the wound. And that applies to while you're getting ready to get the bandage on it and after you've bandaged it. As you're coming down, hold it high to try and keep the blood loss to a minimum as you go down the tree. So the plan for this climb, this spar is about 30 feet tall, is to get up and cut it down with mismatched cuts, doing snap cuts to get 4 to 4.5 foot pieces so that when they're down I can cut them into 16 to 18 inch lengths to fit into my fireplace. I'm going to try to land them flat on the ground so they don't dig holes into the lawn. To help make sure I can get the stump out, I've got a rope attached to a chain. Once I get up there, I'll use the rope to pull the chain up to the 16-foot height, and that will be what I'll use as leverage to help pry this out. The problem I've got is that I don't have any way of throwing my climbing line up there and having it catch to anything, so I'm going to have to advance it as I go. What I'm going to do is fish it through the eye of my descending 8 and then come around the tree and use a Blake's hitch on it. And that way as I go up I can advance it and tighten it and have it stay in that one place. Okay, we're pretty much at the top of the tree, so I'm going to chunk it off about here. Here's my safety line, and I've got a 3-rat prusik going to my belt. My safety line for emergency purposes is going through the descending 8, and after I've chunked this down to about 16 feet tall, I will give that a test for the descent.
not. No wonder. I forgot to brake. Well, this is more than 16 feet. I'm going to go ahead and pull the chain up. Okay.